Alright, I never got around to posting the previous investigation. I know, it was irresponsible. But during my wait for Puppetmaster, I started actually paying attention to my college courses, and I never really had time to revise my first draft. So I suppose I'll just have to post my findings in one long entry, as I have seen the revival of Puppetmaster. The experience was odd. It's hard to remember the things that went wrong unless I run through the entire thing in my head. It's easier to write about the first act in that way, I guess. I know that doesn't really make sense when you put it to words, but it's hard to explain. But enough of my cryptic build-up. I arrived in Chicago last week, where I stayed with a couple of old high school friends for a few days. We had fun catching up, but I never took my mind off of the Puppetmaster's regime. The theater that housed the production was rather obscure, located a few miles out from the main city. None of the news articles I've read post-preview have mentioned the name of the theater, so I can only imagine they don't want the publicity. Upon entering the theater, I was given a playbill by a cheery man in a suit, an older gentleman with a weak smile on his face. The playbill itself showed the white silhouette of a young boy, several puppet strings attached to a scribbly red and black heart that hung within his chest. There were white dollies hanging all around him. I remember thinking that it was odd that a preview playbill would be in color, as those weren't usually printed until the show started making money. Anyhow, I made it to my seat and began to read through the playbill itself. I didn't care much about the names of the cast members, though I do recall seeing the picture for the boy playing the part of Moriator, a 14-year-old boy named Milton Holliday. The show opened to a long, plodding overture, played mostly with piano, with these odd whistles being played through speakers all around the theater. After about 5 minutes, the music changed to a more bouncy, light-hearted tune, and the curtain came up. The stage was empty, nothing but the projected backdrop of a village square with these odd clouds floating above. About 10 children in 18th century German clothing skipped on stage, playing with balloons and dolls. As the music progressed, a small mechanical horse wheeled itself on stage. The lights dimmed and the children stopped. The horse dragged along a cart, upon which a small curtained puppet box faced the audience. As the cart came to a stop, a large puppet in a black robe flew out from behind the curtain. The children screamed and backed away. And then the puppet spoke.
"Good day, little ones. What a wondrous day for bout of play, isn't it? Now don't you be frightened, sweetlings. The puppet dressed in black has a tale to weave, and someone has to hear it. Why, even if a story isn't terribly uplifting, it's the relevance of the story that matters, isn't it? Now gather, my popinjays, for this story, I'm afraid, requires the keen ears of a curious child. For only the innocent can see things simply, without the distractions of growth."
The children looked at each other, then slowly began to gather around the cart. Once they were all seated, the puppet let out a chilling laugh.
"That's the spirit, kiddies!"
Ising spoke.
"Now this is a story about many things, about love and hate, about dark and light, about the difference between right and wrong, and the difference between wrong and right. But at the core, this is a story about a little boy named Moriator."
And with that, the light on the cart fades away, and a light fades in on a small boy holding a broom, smiling proudly. Moriator. The rest of the prologue is rather bland, and I can't remember or decipher the audio to much of the exposition. The puppet, Moriator, and Mr. Obscar share a song. We learn that Moriator was an orphan whom Mr. Obscar found on the side of the street 5 years ago, and has since put him to work in his puppet shop. The costumes from this point seem much less historically accurate from the opening scene. Everyone's costumes seem faded and bland in color scheme, but each of the outfits are ridiculously frilly and layered. Some of the story's exposition is changed. For example, Moriator's last name, Abendsens, has been reapplied from the novel on which the story was based. The staging and set design is oddly reminiscent of Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Woman in White. Most of the sets are made of hyper-realistic projections that give the illusion of a moving camera. However, unlike The Woman in White, there are far more set pieces which actually have moving images projected onto them, like the revival of Sunday in the Park with George. For example, during one of the opening songs, I can hear them whisper. We see Moriator sweep up around the shop. We watch as the front desk and 2 puppet display shelves spin around on the turntable as the projected background spins lightly faster, adding in ominous shadows and subtle lighting changes. It was dizzying but effective. Most of Act 1's exposition seemed rather harmless in my opinion. It almost seemed like the start of a Disney show. However, I did find my inner critic rolling his eyes at some of the puerile lyrics. My personal favorites being, he pretended he was crying, though they told me he was lying. And he was a sickly boy, knowing not of joy. However, upon comparing the new version to what I've heard about that of the other 2, there are some significant changes to the show. For example, the character of Madame Repario has been cut completely. After the cutesy song Get a Puppet, we are taken to the center of the village. Here we have one of the songs that has been cut in previous versions, entitled Whittleline, in which the villagers celebrate a holiday of the same name. This celebration focuses on villagers dancing around with puppets and dolls made out of random objects such as twigs, scraps of clothing, and corn stalks. The music is charming, almost like a folk song, although the lyrics don't seem to make much sense. Dancing as we pither through the withering and woe, evermore aligned along the ever-growing row, eyes without a trance of tones or livelihood, and so rise and rejoice for a Whittleline song, and the willows will wander all Whittleline long. Here, the song where the children sell dolls is used as a bridge in the Whittleline sequence. Another change is the rearranging of The Wind and the Whisperings, a song that was originally played in Act 2. In this new version, it is sung monotonously by a group of black-clad people mourning the loss of a young girl, a rape victim. The sequence itself is so strange. Around 8 people walk on stage, 4 of them carrying a small open coffin. The lighting goes from yellow-orange to blue, and the chorus drones on for about 8 minutes as they somewhat explain how this girl died. The wind was her muse for play, and she pranced along the riverway. She slipped along the sides of the weeping willow's hairs, and she danced along the riverway with nary a remorse. The whisperings from far away, calling out for her to stay. She stayed there with the wind and the whisperings of yore, and she danced with him until he saw it fit to take her source. Again, this uncomfortable ensemble song goes on for about 8 minutes. From what I could assume, the little girl had been playing along the river when a man asked her to stay with him until nighttime, where he raped her and tried to drown her before a policeman stopped him right as the girl had perished. Other than that, most of Act 1 seemed the same as the other versions, given there is a small bit where a girl with a puppet mysteriously appears and disappears while Moriator sweeps up the shop, and a random scene right before the finale in which Mr. Obiscar sings about the hardships of raising Moriator, a song reworked from the same song Madame Repario sang in 1934. The finale song itself, which so many people had claimed held some sort of force to it in the 1934 production, didn't seem all that powerful. Though this may be due to a rewrite, the 1934 version was said to be significantly longer than the 1928 workshop, at around 12 minutes of non-stop gibberish lyrics. This version was a reprise of The Wind and the Whisperings, followed by a few verses told through the odd language. The lyrics are, in fact, somewhat odd-sounding after 2 minutes of non-stop strobe lighting, but I wasn't that affected by it. There weren't any deaths after the finale, at least, though intermission did last 10 minutes more than it was supposed to due to technical difficulties backstage. Act 2 was where most of the changes seemed to be. It began with a light on Moriator being strung up on ropes like a puppet, his friends and Mr. Obiscar hanging on either side of him. A new song plays where all the songs from Act 1 are placed into a montage, while the Act 1 finale music plays in the background. Just as the music shifts to the pounding Whittleline music, Moriator awakens. Remember when I mentioned that Act 2 was mostly made up of a bunch of songs played one after the other for no apparent reason? Most of that has been cut. The only 2 songs from that long drawn-out sequence are What Is This Place? And Moriator's Soliloquy, which has been renamed to Moriator Confronts the Puppet, and has been changed to a duet sequence. The lyrics have been improved as well, whereas the 1934 show had lyrics such as this. What is this place? What are you aiming? This isn't well, sir. Why are we gaming? This isn't a game. The improved lyrics are, what is this place? Wait, am I dreaming? This isn't real, no. Nor what it's seeming, it's all a dream. Still a bit clunky, but at least they make sense now. The particular scenes I listed before involve a panicking Moriator confronting the puppet dressed in black who explains that Moriator's soul once belonged to a child rapist, and that he died before the puppet could punish him. This is where the set designs become a bit odd. There were several floor-to-ceiling metal dollies that would constantly roll about on stage, as if to symbolize Moriator walking somewhere. The backdrop went red, and there were projections of puppets flinging the corpses of children along the walls. To say it was unsettling would be an understatement. After this, the story progresses in a similar manner as the 1928 workshop, but with different twists. Moriator learns that the odd-looking man in black from the first act was the boy that Moriator raped in a past life. The man in black wants to revisit their relationship, but Moriator wants nothing to do with him. They spend the next 10 minutes singing about what might have been, and Moriator begins to remember things. He ends up seducing and dominating the man in black, and they have sex on a bed while a group of children acrobats frolic about on long sheets of fabric above them. Just then, the puppet dressed in black shows up, and orders the old man to go away. He explains to Moriator that his punishment is to forever serve him, aiding in the future rape and murder of children in the village where he lives. As they both sing the title song, several children, including a little girl who drowned in Act 1, join in, all holding miniature puppets dressed in black. This new ending is a bit confusing, but apparently they're saying that pedophilia is some sort of vicious cycle. When a pedophile dies, his soul is placed in that of a newborn child who will by fate be raped themselves. This influences them to become child molesters in their adulthood. Moriator, as well as several other children, manage to defy destiny by escaping their respective rapists, which results in their being enlisted into the Puppetmaster's regime. It makes so little sense, and it's so damn creepy. Then, just like in the 1928 workshop, all of Moriator's friends are returned to the puppet shop, but none of them have any memory of Moriator. We cut back to the cart from the prologue, where we see that all the children have disappeared. From the back of the puppet box, Moriator and the man in black exit from behind the curtains. They hop upon the horse and begin to trot their way out of the town. As they exit the village, they hear a small girl's terrified screams, and she lunges out in front of the cart. She begins to beg Moriator and the man to help her, just as an old man rushes out in pursuit. He insists he is the girl's father, but she sobs that she's never met him before. Panicked, Moriator pulls on the horse reins and runs over the man, killing him. The man in black turns to Moriator and his voice low whispers,
Moriator, what have you done?
Before the lights go out. However, right after this scene is where things quickly became wrong. The light slowly faded from the green tint of the forest into a deep blue, similar to the lighting during The Wind and the Whisperings. The entire company slips out from backstage holding their miniature puppets, staring directly at the audience. Just then, the lights began to flash, and the puppets... I know this sounds kind of stupid to say, but they sang. I don't mean that the children sang while controlling the puppet mouths. The puppets sang. The fucking puppets! And, oh god. The song, it was that same gibberish from the Act 1 finale. The children, the adults, all of them were holding puppets. They chanted those horrible words over and over again, their eyes unblinking, focused on the audience. Trapped in our seats, we were forced to listen to the song repeat itself over and over. I saw that the cast had begun to move the puppets around in jerking, near-erotic dance moves, every now and again twitching in unison with the rest of the company. After a while, I began to feel sick. We were all sick. I could see people in front of me leave their seats ready to leave. I tried tuning the chants out, but that only seemed to make them worse. The music pounded within me, causing me to jerk about with each pounding drum. As I leached back in my seat, I realized something. The pounding within me wasn't just from the orchestra, it was from beneath me. For a moment, I could see that everyone else could see it too. For a faint moment, we could feel the ground beneath us quake along with the chants. I looked up to see if the cast had noticed, but then I saw the puppets. They were still dancing and moving within the performer's grasp, but the performers themselves were not moving their arms. And then, for a moment, we all found relief. From backstage, several crew members rushed onto the stage, pushing several actors away in the process. One of them screamed out, "Fire! Shit!" And then the chaos began. From above the stage, all the lights began to shoot off. The projections behind the actors flickered briefly before shutting off entirely. The company screamed, as did the audience. In a flash of fire and sparks, the actors began to leap off the stage, and we all began to pile out the door. I still had a headache. I could hear the pounding. I could still hear the pounding. The fire department arrived shortly after the theater was evacuated. About 10 minutes before the trucks arrived, we heard the back of the theater collapse. I've since checked the articles online, and 60+ attendants of that show, 9 of them being the cast and crew, have gone missing. As it turned out, most of the people who didn't leave the parking lot were either helping out, like me, or were too shaken up to drive. And when I finally began walking towards my car, a gurney was wheeled right past me. The man I saw lying there, unconscious and hooked up to an oxygen tank, was the same man who had handed me the playbill. I drove back to my friend's apartment and went straight to bed. Even in my sleep, I could still hear the pounding. By morning, my headache had stopped, but the memory of the night before still lingered. I went to my computer straight away to upload the audio that I had recorded. My camera tends to divide long videos into smaller ones, and I immediately deleted the last video. Nobody ever needed to hear that, especially not me. I listened through the recording again, making notes in word processor as I went along. I found myself humming to some of the more bouncy tunes, and the pounding slowly faded away. My fear of the show had lessened. The idea of supernatural forces destroying the theater seemed far too ridiculous for me to take seriously, and I brushed the idea aside. Once that was done, I went to work scanning the playbill. After scanning the front, I went to work scanning the interior pages. A bit curious, I skimmed through some of the production names. And it was then, right there, on that third page, I saw the picture of the man who had handed me the playbill. The man was the head producer and director, I learned. A cheery old man with a wrinkled face, looking away from the camera. Below his picture in bold letters read the name Timothy Cartwright. My face scrunched, my breath went still. All I could hear was the faint memory of the pounding. No, that isn't right, I told myself. It isn't possible. It's a different person. It had to be. Timmy Wright died on October 1st, 1935, at the premiere of the Puppetmaster's regime. Everyone saw it. Everyone saw him begging for help, strung up on strings. This isn't possible. And then I remembered some things. In my interview with Alice Corley James, she mentioned Moriarty's squinty eyes in his monotonous acting. Timmy Wright was known for his wide-eyed expressions and over-the-top delivery. It's what made him famous. The person performing Moriarty that night in 1934 must have been Rory Atkins, the understudy. That and Garrus Creeley had been found dead. Killed by a gunshot to the head. Everyone assumed it was suicide. Nobody even suspected murder. I remember Devon's journal, the puppet mask, the clothes, the fascination Garrus Creeley had with little cutie Wright. Nobody even suspected murder. And why would they? And then, to add to my revelation, I realized that among the cast members who had escaped from the theater, there was one boy sitting in the back seat of his mother's car, the vague, empty face of Milton Holiday. Moriarty. The Puppetmaster's regime is not a simple musical, I've come to realize. It's more than just a production. It's a force, an entity even. It's not just a madman's sick, elaborate scheme to rape his own son. It isn't just a young boy's obsession over destroying his father's work. It isn't only an innocent victim's last attempt at showing the world how he was wronged. It is a greater monster than even that. Within the writing and the music of this show is something, and I don't know what the fuck it is, and I really don't want to. Some kind of monster that refuses to die. People who saw the Puppetmaster's regime in both 1928 and 1934 were said to have suffered from lifelong mental effects, causing them to hum tunes that they heard only once. And even now, as I type, I quietly hum the sick, demented tune of "Never Mind Me, Mister." And when I sleep, the wind and the whisperings refuses to rid itself from my subconscious. I find myself thinking about this production night and day, singing and thinking about possible depth to certain subplots in songs. What's worse is that I know that someday another revival of the demented work will make its way onto this fucking stage. Because Milton Holidays, he's still alive, isn't he? And this evil won't rest until it remakes itself again. I have decided not to post any more of my findings, and this includes the audio taken of the revival, and I suggest that none of you attempt to look further into the matter. It simply isn't worth it.